It's an enormous pleasure to introduce Giulia for our autumn edition of the Yangsheng series that I started in spring and then followed by Henry McCann in summer. So if you haven't seen those, they're up on the member section and you can see the recordings. Uh, I had the great fortune to meet Giulia at the ETCMA General Assembly earlier in the year. And Giulia has, uh, I think I was going to say an equal passion for Yangsheng as me, but I think it surpasses my passion, which is really fantastic to see because um, Yangsheng is sometimes an underemphasized aspect of our medicine, yet some people might argue that the Neijing is actually a text which is primarily a Yangsheng text. Julia has had an incredible life. She is a sinologist, an acupuncturist, a physical therapist, a naturopath. She has a master's degree in Oriental languages and a master's degree in physiotherapy. Uh, and she follows the lineage of Master Ma Shuzhou, where she learned Yang Qigong, and she's taught for many years at various universities, and she's also an author. Um, Her main text, Chinese Medicine, The Root and Flowers, is in its third Italian edition. And the one book that I really like to highlight is her book, which in English, which is Blossoming Roots. This is a beautiful book. We were just discussing it before Julia came on, and we haven't found the right website to actually share with you for this book if you're interested in it. So what we will do is everybody who's attended and signed up for the lecture, when we find the link, we'll send it round. So you'll get the link to her book. But I really absolutely recommend it. And Julia is going to be talking about autumn Yangsheng today, with today as the first day of Li Qiu, the first day of Yangsheng of autumn in the Chinese calendar. And um, just a final note, we were just reflecting uh, just before the session today, that there's something special about the autumn phase of our lives. It's a time when um, the accumulated experience that we have can start to transform into something like wisdom, and you start to appreciate uh, life in a different way, and in a way that when you're looking from a younger phase of life to somebody who has all that experience, it's almost impossible to comprehend how you got there. But autumn represents this accumulation of wisdom and knowledge, and that's why it's so wonderful for me to be able to introduce Julia to share her wonderful wisdom and knowledge with us tonight. So I'll hand over to you, Julia, and feel free to share your screen.
Hello, good evening, everyone. And well, first of all, I would like to thank Alex for inviting me to participate in this Yangsheng initiative. And as the first thing, I would like to apologize in advance to you because, as you can well hear, English is not my mother tongue, and I've never lived in an Anglophone country, so it is highly likely that during this time together, I might make some mistakes or miss a word or have some somewhat bizarre accents. So please excuse me for that, but I trust that I will still be able to convey my ideas about this thing and share it with you. So, our agenda for today's discussion, I thought I would like to introduce, before talking about the details of what we are supposed to do for Yangsheng in autumn, I would like to start in more general terms to explaining where does this behavioral approach to the seasons come from. Because it was not originally in the health context. As we will see, it was especially in the political and social context. And I think it might be interesting just to have some basic historical ideas about this. So that's why I will also talk a little bit about the role of ritual calendars in this behavioral approach. I made a couple of slides just to recall things that you might already know, of course, but how we measure time according to Chinese classical culture. And of course, we'll talk about the 24 solar terms because that's where the presentation is based. Because, you know, behaving according to the season, let's say, I think it's really one of the main characteristics of classical Chinese medicine. And we have different chapters dealing with these issues in the Neijing. But the important thing is that these chapters are not talking just about how we should exercise or what we should eat or things like that, but especially what is the right frame of mind which is in tune with the season. And I think this is truly a peculiarity of the Chinese model for preserving health, because in the Western world we tend to have quite general rules about it. For example, there's an ongoing discussion now about what would be the ideal time to go to sleep, as if this time it would be the same in winter and in summer. And we know it's not so. So in the Western world, when we work about prevention, especially, we tend to give these general rules that do not take into account the flow of time, maybe with the exception of a certain preference for seasonal foods. So then we will talk a little bit about the metal dynamics, because I think it is important to know, if we talk about meditation, for example, in autumn, breathing techniques, etc., what is actually happening to the qi inside our body, and what are the physiological framework we're working on. And then in the last part, in the, let's say, more or less third part, I will give you some, let's say, general notions about what Yangsheng in the autumn time should be. I've split it into the three lunar months of autumn, and there is a keyword for each one of them. So the seventh lunar month will be harvesting, the eighth lunar month, it's empowering the yin, and the ninth lunar month, the keyword is pruning. So the first thing I would like to say is that the notion of the 5 phases as we know it today was conceived not earlier than the 6th century BC. However, already in the Shang dynasty, so 4,000 years ago, and even more in the Zhou dynasty, the 4 cardinal directions were associated to the sacred architecture of the ruler's palace. And the different activities of the sovereign were, let's say, distributed in the various spaces of the building according to their cardinal coordinates. The central hall where the emperor received his subordinates was called Mingtang. And the central hall was always there, but there has been some architectural changes in the different dynasties. For example, the Zhou dynasty had a scheme with 5 rooms or 5 palaces, mainly with the central one corresponding to the earth. In the Qin dynasty, they became 9, which means that they started approaching what then would be the Bagua style, always with the earth in the middle. And during the Han dynasty, we have news about the fact that the construction was made on square plant, and then there was some round roof on it, just to symbolize the harmonization of heaven and earth. So to be sincere, to say the truth, we do not have archaeological evidence of these Mingtang palaces in the remote antiquity of China, but these buildings, and especially the ritual functions, are mentioned in many classical sources, like the Chunqiu Fanlu, for example, or the Baihu Tongyi, or even the Huainan Zi, just to mention a few. So the thing is that since the Western Zhou period, which began around the 8th century BC, the king was still recognized as a central authority, but his role was, let's say, largely formal and ceremonial, liturgical. So it was more or less akin to the role that the Catholic Pope had in the medieval Europe. He was responsible for enthroning princes, to resolving disputes, but most importantly, he was responsible for ritually ensuring the harmony between heaven and earth, and the fact that the seasons were following in a harmonious way, which of course for an agriculture society like China is a very important thing. So the architecture of the imperial palace was designed as a miniature representation of the kingdom on one side and on the cosmos on the other side, and the various ceremonial activities took place in specific part of the palace, aligned with the season that was represented by their cardinal location. So this is few names of the ritual calendars that were produced, because the king's proper conduct was absolutely essential. So he was the son of heaven, and he was seen as the grantor of the climate balance. So consequently, these ritual calendars were detailing the appropriate behaviors for each season in great detail, both for the king's public life and for his private life. And although there's some discrepancies between these calendars and what is written in the Neijing, for example, we can say that for sure these calendars have significantly contributed to the seasonal theories that we found in early medical classics. And in all of them, let's say that the collocation of the Earth phase has always been rather problematic, because they have chosen different solutions. So the Earth could either stay in the center without corresponding to any specific period of time, could be represented in the 4 oblique directions that are called Wei. So the same way that you find in Towei, the name of the point stomach 8. And this is because it's in the diagonal of the head. Or it could be associated with the last period of summer, beginning of autumn. For example, both the Youguan and the Sishi chapters of the Guanzi use this solution. Or there could also be other possibilities. For example, the Wuxing chapter of the same text divides the whole year into 5 parts of 72 days each. And also other possibilities appear in ancient times. There is a wonderful work of Alan Rickett that has translated the Guanzi in 2 volumes, and makes also a very nice introduction to these calendars. And he's quoting, for example, a text of the 1st century BC, where the year is divided into 2 sets of 15 periods each period of 12 days, and each one divided into 2 periods of 6 days. So there's many different possibilities. But what we are interested in is to understand how did this liturgical, sacred, ritual architecture of the archaic dynasties come to influence the Yangsheng notions that we're following. And to better understand this, we need to recall a last historical passage. If from the 8th century BC, the role of the emperor was just ritual, from the 4th century BC, he had completely lost the legitimacy of his power. So it was the legitimacy of the political power itself to be in question, because the wars between feudal states had completely undermined the possibility of achieving consensus through lineage. There was no divine right anymore, because the divine right as son of heaven was associated with a lineage, but the conflicts among the princes and princedoms have completely jeopardized the central authority of the Zhou emperor. So there was a situation in which lineages were very fragmented and often completely disrupted. Just think about the fact that the first emperor of the Han Dynasty was originally coming from a peasant family. So we had then the very short-lived Qin Dynasty that tried just to overcome this problem by substituting consensus with brutal force. But if you can gain power by force, maintaining it requires really consensus. So one of the subsequent Han Dynasty's primary concern was to try to restore a common cultural foundation, ethics, education, rights, etc., and to build consensus around it. So in order to reconstruct this ideology, which was necessary for political stability, the Han emperors, and particularly Han Wudi and his court ideologist Dong Zhongshu, they drew on, let's say, a cosmo-anthropological model that was developing in the Warring State period, and it's reflected also in the Huanglao thought. And we now know that this current has really had a very strong influence on the Neijing. So just to give you an example to try to better explain what I mean, you take nature and you make it the basis, the model of your governance. This happened, for example, in much more recent times. If you think about Malthus, for example, that influenced by Darwin's theory of evolution, he started saying that since in nature we can observe a high level of competition, so the survival of the fittest, the law of the jungle, and this was used to justify a very aggressive and competitive social model. And despite the fact that we now know that nature works much more on cooperation than on competition, these ideas are still very strong today. So the Huanglao philosophy emphasized organized cooperation under a centralized authority, which should supposedly be in line with the so-called will of heaven, which should supposedly communicate with heaven, 通天. So the legitimacy of the power, the consensus, was created from these sacred architectures and brought into the, let's say, the political order to trying to seek stability and continuity. And here comes the interesting thing, because the human body itself became the main model on which this government was aligned. So the idea was the cosmos and nature are naturally ordered. The human body develops from this resonance with the celestial spheres and functions according to this spontaneous, hierarchical, but at the same time cooperative arrangement of the internal organs and also of the energetic grids of the channels of the meridians. And so society between these cosmos and macrocosmos and microcosmos is also as it should be. So it needs no outer legitimacy. So the laws of nature and those of human physiology became the models of governance. And I think that chapter 8 of the Su Wen is the most representative of this Huanglao influence in the Neijing. So as in good governance, each organ plays a specific role, but for the benefit of all. And you can see, for example, here, that because of this, the images of the organization of the inner organs in the body and of all the channels that you have in the body are normally called Ming Tang. So they're called the same way in which the sacred architecture of the royal palace was called. This means, if you think about it, I think this is a sort of democratization of the role of having the possibility of connecting heaven and earth. So this sacred architecture was projected into the human body, and this is why these representations are called Ming Tang. And this means that everybody is actually son or daughter of heaven. So everybody has the possibility of interacting with the whole cosmos because of this sacred architecture that our body is expressing. So in chapter 8 of the Suen, where this idea was mainly reproduced, having the heart as the emperor and all the other organs as ministers, as subordinates, the role given to the lungs, the organ of autumn, is Xiangfu. The Xiangfu is a prime minister, is also chancellor, but it's also a mentor. I think this is an important point. If you read the wonderful book of Professor Hacker, that, well, it came out in the 80s, and it's called the Dictionary of Official Titles in Imperial China, you can see that the role of this Fu indicates an elderly advisor of the emperor. So it was a wise person, often a relative, who accompanies the sovereign as a mentor. So the role of the lungs, in a way, is a sort of Freudian superego, always remembering what your duties are, how you should comply with the, let's say, with the laws, with so the duties mainly. And we can see this is something that has a lot to do with the lungs and the role, and it has also to do with the Zongqi, which is sometimes translated also as ancestral qi. Because every time you come to get a role, you have duties connected to it. And the lungs are there to remember to the heart, just not to follow a very completely free way, but remember what your duties are. And this is why in the same chapter, we can see that lungs issue 治节, so management and regulation. And this zhi is really the emblem of the Huanglao thought in the Neijing, because it's a character that means both to cure the body and to govern the state. And you can see that this idea is really widespread, both in the literary and in the medical classics. For example, you see here the Ling Shu 71, that makes this correlation between the shape of cosmos and the shape of the human body. But also, for example, the Huainan Zi. So because the human body is the image of the cosmos, the Huainan Zi says that if you deal with your own affair in a way that is not in harmony with heaven, which means to be in harmony with the flow of time. We remember heaven is connected to time as earth is connected to space. Then this would be rebelling against one's own nature. So again, I think this is a very important passage, is this democratization of the emperor's role, because if in the early first millennium only the emperor was, you know, the son of heaven and serving as a mediator, from this moment on, each one of us can be an emperor. And if we cannot, not everyone can govern a state, but for sure, everybody is entitled to rule over their own inner domains. Okay, so this was the first concept I wanted to convey. And then another thing, just to recall, maybe most of you already know about it, but the calculating time and setting these calendars had many different challenges. And the first challenge was, for example, to put together the lunar and the solar calendar. So I'm not going to talk very much about this because you will have these slides. You can read it for yourself. But essentially, the problem was that the ritual year was 360 days. The solar year was 366. The 12 lunations are equivalent to 348. And, it was very difficult to put them all together. So what they did is that they started having 5 years units of time, where you had some extra solar lunar months, where you had some lunar months that were 30 days, the long ones, and some others that were short. So in the end, the total sum for these 5 years would be of 1,830 days. And if you divide this for 5, you go back to the solar year of 366. The Suwen, chapter 9, explains that 5 days make one Ho, 3 Ho make one Qi, it meant Jie Qi, and 6 Qi make one season. 4 seasons make 1 year. So this is the basic unit of time that you find throughout all the classic. 1 year is 4 seasons, 1 season is 3 months. And there is also a special name every time for the first, second, and third month of each season. So the first month of each season would be the Meng month. The central month of each season would be the Zhong month. And the third, the Ji month. This is interesting because, for example, if you look, let's say, Ling Shu chapter 13, the chapter dedicated to the sinew vessels and their ailments, you can see that they are divided, the different B syndromes are divided by these months. So if it's belonging to the month, to the Zhong, or to the Ji month, for example, every month has 2, let's call them Qi articulations or solar terms, the Jie Qi, of 15 days each. And so one of them, it corresponds to 3 Ho. 2 Ho make what was in the ancient times the week, which was not made of 7 days, but it was made of 10 days, and it was called Shun. So this 10 days week, we find it also quite often. For example, in chapter 22 of the Suwen, and 1 day equals 12 double hours. This, you know very well, the Shuten, or even 10 so-called quarters. They're just a little bit less than a quarter of an hour. Now, the one point that I would like to make here is that all these calculations are scalable. I think chapter 22 of the Suwen is particularly interesting to understand that, because, for example, it says the lung problems are stable in autumn, they should be treated in winter, etc. Or you can take as a unit a 10 days week. You know that these 10 days are connected to the 10 heavenly stems. So there's 2 days that are belonging to metal, that would be the Gengxing days. And those days equal the autumn season. So you can also use the same strategy, but instead of applying it to a whole year, you just squeeze it into a 10-day unit. And the same thing goes for the 24 hours. So they say, for example, that you are stable in the evening, which is the metal time of the day. You will have the possibility of curing during, let's say, midnight, which would be the winter time of the day. And that if you have a lung ailment, this will get worse at midday, because that's where the fire, the counteracting element, is present. So the main concept is the scalability of these measures. You can apply them to a year, to a 10 days unit, or even to a single day of 24 hours. And they work just the same. As we were saying with Alex, you can even apply them to a whole life, because your youth would be like spring, and your early maturity like fire, and your later maturity like earth, etc. So let me quote from this other text. It's called Guanzi, and this is a text that has been really very, very strongly influenced by the Huanglao thought. So we were saying all life cycles are assimilated to the seasons. It doesn't matter how large or small they may be. In this holographic view of Chinese medicine, whether the cycle is as long as a lifetime or short as a cell reproduction, it always starts from a moment that we could call latency. And here it's called Tai-yin, but remember, this is not the same as the Tai-yin we apply to the meridian system. This latency is followed by an activation phase that reaches a climax. And then from this moment on, there is a return going down, let's say, to the previous state of latency. And this is exactly the period and the dynamic we are going to explore together today. By the way, I found particularly interesting the fact that in English, autumn is also called fall, right? So it's falling of the leaves, this falling of the energies, going back to this state of quietude and possibilities that is represented by the winter. So autumn occupies the right sector. Now let's see what the Guanzi said. I found it quite interesting. It says the positions of heaven and earth include front, back, left, and right. The sage take this as the model in order to establish standards and rules. And as you see, the ancient character for phases was actually representing a crossroad. And so you have these four positions represented in the character that we now use for the 5 phases. But it says something else. It says that spring gives life on the left, and autumn heals on the right. Summer grows in front, and winter hoards on the back. So these 4 positions are connected to these activities, and the autumn activity is killing. So now the problem comes of how comes that killing can be a way to nurture life? Or, well, we will see it is actually quite a very important factor. And then it says that affairs of life and growth, which means affairs connecting the left side of the cycle, represent culture while harvesting and hoarding represent martial arts. Ooh. So cultural affairs are treated on the left and martial affairs on the right. And this is the rules of the sages. So we start already introducing the fact that autumn has also to do with, well, the metal element, martial arts, and killing. But we will see this killing is really a prerequisite of nurturing life. This is the solar terms we're going to explore together. So the Jie Qi. Another interesting thing is that if you invert the characters, so you talk about Qi Jie, this means integrity and moral courage. And this is another of the themes of autumn, because we have seen Jie is something which is under the rule of the lungs, according to the Suwen 8. I would like you to notice something, that there's a discrepancy between the lunar month and the associated terrestrial branches. So the 7th month does not correspond to the 7th branch, but to the 9th branch, and so on. And this is quite an interesting factor, because it makes the 10th lunar month, I don't want to spoiler what the next speaker will say about the winter season, but the 10th lunar month is actually considered to be the most yin. It's the month in which we honor death, which is the other side of life. And in this month, no new buildings should be started, the earth should not be moved, the furniture in the house should not be moved. This is really the moment of highest yin and quietude. So you might think that the maximum of yin is reached in the winter solstice, but it is not exactly so, because in the winter solstice, you already have the first of the terrestrial branches. You already have Zi, which means that life is already present, even if in a latent form. And this is why, truly, the 1 month that is connected to death, and by the way, it also corresponds to the Scorpio sign in the Western world, so there is kind of, resonance with it, is the 10th month. I'm saying this also because I think that the choice of putting the World Acupuncture Day of the UNESCO right in this 10th month would, let's say, not have been considered particularly auspicious from the ancient sages, because that's not the time to start something. Okay. Another thing I would like to say is that the same term Jie is used in many different ways, so would be maybe worthwhile to go in depth a little bit about this term. For example, in Ling Shu chapter 7 talks about the Shurajie, and it has nothing to do with time. This is actually the 12 acupuncture techniques that you use for regulation, but they are called the same name. So why is this? Because this character originally depicts the knots of the bamboo. So this is why you have the bamboo radical on top. The lower part is actually phonetic normally, but it shows a person kneeling in front of a recipient, probably of food. And we are talking now about the Jie Qi, translated as Qi articulations or solar terms, but the same term you find in Guangjie, which means joints or articulations. So this is to say that Jie is a sort of interruption which grants continuity, which seems a paradox, but is exactly what is happening. So as in your limbs, the articulation guarantees the fact that they have a continuity, but at the same time, without these empty spaces, they would have no function. The Jie, it's a holiday, which means that it's what keeps together two working periods in a way, by giving a discontinuity into the continuity. And Tiaojie, it means to regulate. So the idea is that setting limits in a continuum of a cycle is the basis for regulating behavior. And this is why we find hexagram 60, which is called Jie, translated as limitation, restriction, moderation, discipline, boundaries, because as we have seen, it is the calendar, it is this different let's say, interruptions that are giving the measure for self-restraint. So the way in which we should control our behavior. And this said, we do not have to forget what the Ling Shu chapter 1 says about this jie. And it says, what we call jie is where the spirit chi moves, exits, and enters. And it's not the same thing as skin, flesh, sinews, and bones. So what we are looking for with the tip of our needles is exactly this jie. And this is important because, as we have seen, lungs rule zhi jie. So the management and regulations, but now we know this regulation has many, many different meanings. And we could also say that lungs, in a way, as we will see, rule over the possibility of having this entrance and exit of the spirit from our body, or the connection with the spiritual light. Just a last thing about this idea of projecting the calendar into the body. This is a much more recent model, end of the Ming Dynasty, beginning of the Qing Dynasty. And as you can see, the 24 solar terms are the names of each of the 24 vertebrae. And the piece that belongs to the solar terms of autumn goes from the second thoracic vertebra, which means just above Feishu, to the fourth cervical vertebra that by no chance is the principal seat of the phrenic nerve, which is the nerve that allows the movement of the diaphragm, innervating the diaphragm. So you can see it's symbolic, but there's also kind of functional relation to that. Now, I understand that maybe if I talk about yin yang, somebody might get very bored because most of you are very expert people. But there's one thing that I really would like to say, and it comes from one of the most ancient classics of archaic China, which is the memory of the rites. Because I feel there's a great misunderstanding in thinking that yin is passivity. When I hear yang is active and yin is passive, I don't agree. I don't agree, and because that would be a great misunderstanding, I think, also of the role of the women. I can hear some Confucian prejudice on this idea. What this memory of the right says is that yang is active and yin is reactive. And this is, something that we all can experiment in, even in a couple. So it says the way of the sky is called round, the way of the earth is called square, square is dark, round is bright. And okay, this is very plain. But then, this is important point. It says the bright is what emits qi. Thus, it has an exterior shine, while the dark is what contains qi. Thus, it shines interiorly. Therefore, fire has an exterior shine, while metal and water have an interior one. The emitting qi, which would correspond to fire, exerts, and the containing qi transforms. So this is the key concept. Quietness is not passivity. This is something that the Tai Chi and Qigong practitioners know very well. There is movement in quietness and quietness in movement. There's yin in yang and yang in yin. And this is particularly true for the middle seasons, for spring and autumn. So the fact that there's no external shines means that the energy is brought back towards the root. It does not mean that the energy is not there. It does not mean that you do not have light. It means that your light becomes interior. So quietude and inner work, which are the main themes for autumn. That's why I gave the subtitle Inner Work to this presentation, are really resonant with the autumn season, but are far from being passive. This movement that you have in stillness is the true inner work of transformation, is the true movement of spiritual evolution. And the quality of our action in the world depends on how we transform, on how we evolve. And we transform and evolve when our spirit is in quietude. So this is true also for the practitioners. You know, it's very important what you do acting on the patients. But if you don't take the time to reflect on what you have been doing and what effect it has produced, then it's very difficult for you to grow and evolve, you know. And we are sometimes so driven by our necessities of acting in the world, of doing things, that we just don't allow ourselves the time to evolve. And the Huang Lao has this point very clear. And it says, you know, there was one saying in the Huang Lao that says, 内生外王, so you are saint inside and king outside. So it means that the prerequisite for our actions to be in harmony with the will of heaven, and therefore appropriate and effective, is to have this time, is to have the time of gathering the light of the spirit inside so that we can transform ourselves. And this is what the Su Wen, chapter 4, says. It says, 周连神气, 是九气平. So if you gather and you restrain your spiritual qi, this is what makes the autumn qi even. And if you don't direct your inner will towards the exterior, then the Lang qi becomes clear. So this has a lot to do with this gathering and restraining the spiritual qi. It is not to put obstacles to freedom. It is actually to concentrate an energy so that this energy can produce an effect that you would not have while you are active, while you are dealing with the world around you. The roots of the trees are very active in autumn and winter. That's why, for example, if you want to collect medical roots, you should choose the autumn season to do that. So the tree loses its leaves, we lose interest for the outer world, we are not with our senses open to the outer world, but this does not mean that this energy has disappeared. This energy is going towards the root. So the trees lose their leaves, we sometimes lose our hairs. We will see very soon something that we can do to maybe just avoid this problem in the early autumn. But in any case, what the Su Wen advise is that in this season, we should not direct our will toward the exterior, but toward the interior. And remember, as we were saying, there's one autumn every day. So at dusk, maybe, we should take the time just to go inside and maybe revise what we have been doing and maybe just connect to the other reality, which is not the reality that falls under our senses. And this is also sort of purification. We will see purification. It's another important thing for the lungs. Let go the worldly affair. And it is true for autumn. It is true for the evening. And as we were saying with Alex, this is true especially for the autumn of our lives, in which we absolutely need to find these spaces. So the first word that is connected, this has already been said in the previous presentations, there is one key term for the 4 seasons, and normally the key term for autumn is shou. this character of shou, it's another wide, has a lot of meanings. For example, it means to harvest, but it has the idea that you are harvesting the fruits. So in a way, you are harvesting the fruits produced by your own effort and work. So this is what happens, hopefully, in the autumn of life. And it also means to accept, but it's a kind of accepting a gift, like the earth accepts all the fruits that are falling down from the trees. We have an expression which is 受功. 受功 means to close the exercise of qigong, but it also means that you are gathering the energy that you have produced, that you are endowed by this energy. In medical terms, shoulian is used for astringent function, but it is also used in behavioral approach for us to restrain yourself, to keep control on yourself. Or it can be used pathological for a contracture. But what is it? A contracture is yang qi not flowing towards the sinew vessel. So it is always connected as a meaning. The main thing is 收心, which means to concentrate, and also especially to get into the right frame of mind, to focus. So now it's the moment in which I would like to revise with you some of the qi dynamics for the metal element that I think can help us understand what we should do, or what we are actually doing when we follow the Yangsheng measures for these seasons. So one important thing is that this concept of shou, it's also related to the idea of gu. Gu, it means to consolidate and to secure. Now, beginners might think that gu is something yin, right? Because when we do consolidate, make something solid, material, etc., that could be thought as a yin function, but is actually truly a very yang function. And it has to do with wei qi. So it has to do with the kind of qi that is ruled by the lungs, because as we know, the wei qi during the day especially has this function of securing the surface of the body, what we call gu biao, so not allow too many fluids to be lost through sweating. But during the night, it has the function of securing the essence, gu jing. So we need yang to preserve and to protect the yin. And we know that wei qi has two very different kind of circulations during the day and during the night. And the interesting thing is that wei qi is the most yang of all the qi of the body. It's also called the harsh or qi. And it goes to charge the yang of the kidney during the night. So as we were saying, it's not passivity, but it's something that happens inside. And I think it's almost impossible to talk about the functions of the lung without involving, on the one side, the spleen, and on the other side, the kidneys. Because when wei qi acts on the surface of the body as protective qi from the exterior pathogenic agents, it is supported by the yang of the kidney. But then during the sleep, the opposite happens, and it's this yang that goes back to the kidney to give them back the energy. At the same time, the yin of the kidney is fundamental for qi absorption, is fundamental for the intake of qi, is fundamental for inspiration, is the shen na qi function. And this is also connected to these down-bearing movements that transforms qi into fluids and ensures that fluids get to the kidney and bladder. So this is the sujiang, a purifying and descending dynamic of the lungs. So this is what physiologically happens during the day and during the night. And is part of this important relationship between lungs and kidney. And we can say that lungs and kidney essentially are the most important organs for the autonomic system, because remember, awareness is linked to the blood, and now we are on the sphere of the essence and of the fluids. So this might seem paradoxical, but the fact is that because of this mechanism, the more we concentrate our energy inside, the more our sphere of resonance expands. This function of the Wei Qi is linked to what the Chinese called Gan. Gan is both the sensation and perception when the Wei Qi is acting on the sensorial organs and on the surface of the body, and the sensations that do not fall under the senses, our capability, let's call it the sixth sense, just to make it easy. For example, the Yugan, the premonition, could be an example of that. So the more we bring this energy in while keeping our awareness. So what we do is we exploit the natural phenomena that happens while we're asleep, but we're doing is keeping our awareness. And when we do that, we activate another pattern of the functions of the bodily surface. So when we close our senses to the world, we nourish our interior. Lungs are in connection with the skin, but the skin is truly, especially the watery layers that are on the surface of the body, are the organ for this sixth sense. So we can, we know meditating, we gain mental clarity, we promote insights, etc., but we also go to nourish our primordial will. We are also going to activate the reason why we have incarnated. And I think that the Huntian, the cosmological model of the Huntian, which is another cosmological school of the 4th century BC, might give us just an image of this idea, because they say cosmos is made like an egg. The earth is floating on water, so water would be representing the kidneys. It has this airy cup on top, which would represent the lungs. But the important thing is, the most important part is the skin of the egg. So it's the surface of the egg, which is called Xuan, the mystery. So the lungs rule over the skin, and the skin has many different functions, including the fact of being the interface between ourselves and the mystery. So by consciously introverting our awareness from the outer to the inner world, we activate this surface system of resonance. And this makes us understand better what the Suwen 3 says. And it says, the Qi of the blue sky is clear and quiet, and consequently, our will and deep intentions are regulated. If we abide by it, there's two different possibilities of translations, because this fu can both mean to take in as a medicament or to obey. I prefer to interpret it as obeying, but you might find other translations. So if we abide by it, our yang qi consolidates. So you see, we are back to this idea of shou, we are back to this idea of gu. This is what happens. And if this happens, even if a thieving wind would come, it would bring no harm. Therefore, the sages, by concentrating their essence and spirit, obey the Qi of heaven and communicate with the light of the spirit. And I think this is the most important part of what we should do in this autumn, wherever we want to put it. Just a last note, this surface of the body, the watery layers of the surface of the body, are called xuanfu, which means the mysterious Fu organ. Sometimes if you go on the medical dictionaries, you find this term translated as skin pores, but it is not so, because it is coming from a sentence in Suen 61 that has been, taken out of the context. If you read the whole chapter, you will see that it's really talking about the root of the kidney manifesting on the surface, which is dominated by the lungs. In this specific case, it's talking about superficial edema, but it's for sure not just the skin pores. So the Xuanfu has a much deeper meaning. I just wanted to add this. And now the last part, I hope you're not fallen asleep yet. But for the last part, I would like to talk about the different attitudes of the 3 lunar months of autumn. The 7th lunar month, so we have the same keyword, harvesting, show, nourish the harvesting. So this is the moment in which the earth received the fallen fruits as a gift, full of seeds, full of new hopes for the future. It's the closest period to summer, so we might also attribute it to the earth element. And actually, I think this period is really both metal and earth. So both the Tai-yin organs should be considered in this spleen, both lungs and spleen as the organs of acquired energy. Because, by the way, we need oxygen to transform what we eat. So there couldn't be no root of the acquired energy without also the breathing activity. And this is why I think in this period we have to interpret it as a Tai Yin Yang Ming pattern. So we have to nourish the acquired energy both of the earth and of the sky. And as Suen chapter 9 says, the sky nourishes the human beings with the 5 qi and the earth with the 5 flavors. Now, for what concerns the qi, they're also linked to the odors, to the smell, to the sense that we breathe. And this has also to do with large intestine. We know that the most used point, both for exercise and acupuncture, if we have problem of hyposmia or anosmia, is large intestine 20. And we know that both the lungs and the stomach are receptacles for the raw elements that come from the outside and then have to be elaborated to become qi, useful for qi fluids, blood, etc., useful for the body. So in this period, it is particularly advised to eat these white-fleshed fruits like apples and pears, because pears have a specific function of nourishing the lungs yin, and apples are very rich of fiber, and they help the large intestine, they help to have this smooth transit. And so this moment is a moment in which we have to balance dryness and dampness, which means that there's a strong accent on hydrating, but we have to be aware of the fact that it might encumber the lungs if it becomes dampness. How can we avoid that? So the keyword would be hydrate and move the qi at the same time. Maybe in spring we need to move the blood, and in autumn we absolutely need to move the qi. And by the way, just remember that the lung meridian starts in the stomach, and this is not just by chance. And if we think about it, if we lose our olfactory senses, well, even the food has no flavor anymore. Another expression connected to this moment is 废朝百脉. This has been translated in various ways, but so you can see here how Xie Zhufang, how Oming, how Wiseman, the best translators, use this expression. But I think this is really related to breathing for moving the blood. Yangsheng, commenting this expression, says, that the author of the Taisu, so explains that the fact that the vessels converge back to the heart has to do with breathing in. And this is exactly what our Western physiology says, because by lowering the diaphragm, we create this vacuum, which is helping us to bring back the blood to the heart and then to the lungs. So this idea is truly what the returning of the blood to the thorax. And this is also why we have the influent point or the systemic point for the vessels on the lung meridian. So this is also what Yangsheng said, that the fact that the lung make all the vessels converge is because it's what justifies the fact that we have this Mai-Kou or Qi-Kou, lung 9 point, as the main point for the vessels. And it's also to remember the Zong-Qi function, which is coordinating cardiorespiratory activity. So in few words, I want to say that we often neglect the role that the lungs have on the blood. We're not used to this in the TCM model, but if we look at the Ling Shu, it says that the lungs are actually producing the blood. And it also said that the Zong Qi is the Qi that goes to the nose. Okay, so we have a pneumatic role of the lungs, which is of course, for the fluids. So it says the heart moves the blood and the lung moves the fluids. But for what concerns returning of the blood to the heart, the lung play an important role. And I think that is what this expression means. Last slide for this month would be considering what are we talking about when we talk about breathing exercises, which are one of the main things for the autumn time. I want to recall the fact that we have two different words for breathing. So when we talk about 呼吸, this is really expiration, inspiration. We're talking about mechanical breathing. But when we exercise, we're talking about 吸. And 吸, it means to take a rest, to enjoy your rest. It means to breathe, but to breathe with your whole body, not just with the nose or the mouth. And if you see how this character is composed, it is composed by the sign that means oneself, so it's connected to your identity, and then the heart and the mind. And this is the pictograph of the nose that becomes the character for the identity. And you might have noticed that the Chinese very often, when they have to say myself, they indicate, they aim at their nose, because with your first breath, you take on the reason why you have come here. And this is connected to your duties, to what you have to do in this world. And it has to do also with breathing and with the lungs. So I'm saying that when we're talking about breathing, we are not just talking about air going in and out from the body. We're talking about much more going in and out of the body. And I will not talk here about all the different breathing techniques, because that would take too long, and I see time is running. So let's go directly to the 8th month, on which the key word I've chosen is empowering the yin. And this is the period of the white dew and of the autumn equinox. This is also the period in which Taoists would go out in nature to collect dew. And I can say this is the moment of the, let's say, the sweetness of autumn. So this refreshing dew comes down, all the plants are relieved from the summer heat, The climate is very moderate, it's still warm during the day, but it refreshes in the night. Still here we have to prevent autumn dryness, but it's a very nice moment. This year it will be from the 7th of September to the 8th of October. So the length of day and night approaches the equinox. So one advice, for example, here would be to add exercises that are producing saliva in the mouth to be swallowed, because that would be our do, that would be what we produce to give help to our inner organs. And there is this very important feast in the Autumn Festival. This year will be October the 6th, in which we should spend time with our intimate, loved people. We have to expose ourselves to the full moon in this moment. This is considered one of the most auspicious full moons. For those of you that use crystals, that is the best night to charge your stones under the full moon, maybe even in the water. And to nourish yin, it also means to empower the yin. It also means to have time for this, I call it now, active quietude. It is also the best time to inhale fragrances. So this is a moment in which we can work very successfully with incense, with aromatic teas, and also with essential oils. Particularly advised here is pine, that tonifies metal, eucalyptus, that helps the qi descent, and so also the purification, and also camphor and benzoin. Because in this moment, okay, still sweet, but it's also a moment in which there might be some parasites. We have to beware about the parasites. It's also a moment to honor the deceased, to worship ancestors. There's river lanterns for that, because we don't want them to parasite our energy. And also physical parasites, like that with the humidity, with the beginning of cold, might come into your room. So, for example, cinnamomum, camphora, and benzoin are very good for avoiding parasites. There's recent studies that show that cinnamomum camphora can be used also for its antifungal activity in crops, so substituting pesticides. And even in Ayurveda, camphora is used to treat bronchitis, lungs, colds, diarrhea, large intestine, and edema, which is the relationship between kidneys and lung. And also the effects of benzoin resins have been known even by the ancient Romans and Egyptians. So they were using it especially for issues with lungs and breathing problems. So let's say also what the Suwen says is that if the yang is exuberant and cannot condense, you see we have this theme again, then the yin qi will consequently run out. If, on the contrary, yin is in peace, which means that we can work with these still positions and movement inside, yang manages to condense into it, and then essence and spirit will consequently be regulated. So even here, we need to have moistening and fiber-rich foods, but at this moment, we are already in the center of autumn, not really too much raw fruits. So we can still use pears, but maybe we want to steam them, or we want to add some honey, or we want to add some almonds, some walnuts. Oat is a very good food in this moment. Glutinous rice, etc. And then there is a saying that says, in this period of white dew, you should eat long yen. Another word about ginger, which is a very important spice and root also for this period. Ginger can be used almost throughout all the seasons, but it depends how you use it, because the skin of the ginger has actually a fresh nature. So it is partially compensating its spicy and warm nature. So it is used, for example, in the wu pisan, the skin of the ginger, to address superficial edema, which is something that we have been seeing. The fresh root is warm and pungent, so it depends if you use it with the skin or without the skin, can be more fresh or more warm. And if we have the dried root, then at this point it's really hot and pungent. So use the dried root in winter, and you can use the fresh root in this period. And if you want to use it when the weather is warm, don't peel it. Don't peel the skin off. The same goes with essential oils. We can also change the way of using them according to the season. For example, in autumn, we would breathe them in, and in winter, we can ingest them, and in spring, we can rub them, and in summer, we can use them for a bath. So that would be for another example of using them for the season. Finally, the 9th month, the key word is pruning. And here we start to feel the harshness of autumn. So the dew becomes frost, there's cold, there's dampness. And remember, the Guanzi said, on this side of the cycle, we have death, we have martial arts, we have, the severing that is brought by the metal element. But remember, to restrain yourself, you need even more force than you need to express yourself. And here is the moment in which we should guard against autumn sadness, bei, and also anguish, yo, which are the emotions connected to the lungs. In the Neijing, there is this double term very often used, bei. We have to remember that when we use two terms, we are actually having a narrower meaning than by using the separate terms, because, it's a sort of minimum common denominator of the two terms that we call sadness. I, it's more acute sadness. Bei, as you see from the logograph, the phonetic part, it says that you are denying the joy of your heart. So it's more connected with a chronic situation of discouragement and pessimism. And yo, it's truly reflecting this mental encumberment that we need to address in this autumn season. According to Cargren's interpretation, this is the head, which is really like almost crushing the heart so that you become discouraged. Cor cordis in Latin is the same root that you use for courage. And then there is a person that walks slowly because of all this weight of this encumberment of thoughts. And we are used now to say, okay, this is the emotion, this is the organ that is addressed to, but in the classics is not so. So, for example, bei can cause problems to many different organs. In the Suen 44, for example, it says that it disrupts the uterus collateral, the baoluo. It might strike the core, the center, zhong, bringing it to exhaustion. It may damage the huanso because it's exactly the opposite of the courage that the huanso is expressing. And this, you can read it in Ling Shu chapter 8, or it can even be harmful to the heart, Ling Shu chapter 28. So this must be balanced somehow, the joy of the heart and the negation of the heart that might happen in this period. It is also very often associated with yu. So we talk about yo yu. Well, nowadays, yu is associated to the liver. To say the truth, well, it's a long story. I don't think I have the time now to explain it all, but just let me recall the fact that this is a very intricate vegetation that we have on top. And so this is the situation that we have if we don't use this metal to sever what is useless in this period. The late autumn food, you can see that we shift from raw food to dry foods, especially. So you have sesame seeds, you have, some special roots that can help you fight against autumn dryness, lotus roots and seeds, persimmons. This is very important. We will see raisins and especially mushrooms. Mushrooms are really important in this period, especially mushrooms like shiitake, because they also boost our immune system. They prepare us to face the winter season. And also we were saying that in this period is very common to lose hair. And we know that biotin or biotin, I don't know how you say it in English, and zinc can be the two substances that we can use to avoid this problem. And guess what are the foods that are more rich of these substances? Walnuts, almonds, cashew, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, and shiitake. So this is exactly the foods that correspond to this season, including some maybe daikon or other, starting to use some roots and seeds as we will go towards the winter. There's this saying that says you won't have a runny nose if you eat persimmons at falling frost. So as a conclusion, I would like to say that the lungs have a lot to do with our identity. Yangsheng, as you see, the word yang has the goat on top, and this is not by chance because we have it in the character for beauty, Mei, we have in the character for goodness, Shang. So the goat is really a sign of the best part of. And we can see also in the Mediterranean myths, there is Jason and the golden sheet, I think it's called, which is the skin of a goat. In any case, the virtue that is connected to the lungs is Yi. Yi has a lot to do with the sense of duty, which comes from the awareness and faithfulness to the role that we have decided to take in this life, especially for what concerns the relationship with our family members and the society. So righteousness, which means appropriate actions and behavior in any circumstance. And look, the upper part is the goat, and the lower part is a character that means me, myself. So Yi, it means to work to make the best of yourself. It's a sort of noblesse oblige, right? The sense of honor and justice. So we have these two virtues. This is for the spring. This is for the left side of the circle, Ren, humanity, and Yi is justice. So it's like you have on the one side mercy and on the other side justice. And remember, this is the true attributes of the divinity. So in spring, in our compassionate sense of humanity, we might benefit our neighbors, but in our enlightened solitude, we might benefit the whole world. And when we say that the West is connected to sternness and killing, this is because if we don't cut part of the branches, we will have a very gloomy forest, and that is the significance of Yi. We'll start to feel really hopeless, frustrated, not be able to act. This virtue of the lungs has a lot to do with cutting, but even shaping our personality. These characters also have the ge, which is, the knife by which you cut. Because we have these two different ways of governing. We have seen the first one, which is based on charisma and on letting things go. So you have the water, regulating the water channels was most important duty for a sovereign to ensure the wellness of his people. And then we have Zhi. And in Zhi, you see a very leafy tree and a knife, because we need to cut something. This is the right moment to do that. Reflect and cut. Pruning means sacrificing quantity for quality. So getting rid of the superfluous, make space for what really matters to you. And this happens also physiologically. There is the synaptical pruning, which happens especially at more or less 2 years of age, but also throughout all our lives, is really indispensable process for mental efficiency. If you don't have it, it's a big problem. So what I want to say is that not always growth is positive. If it's not orderly growth, it can be very bad. If you have aberrant neuron growth, it's even worse than having a neuron loss. So this is the moment to clean. We can declutter, we can clean our inner and our outer space, but we also need this pruning. Okay, this is not painless. We know this, but this is what beauty requires. If we want to bring out our goat, if we want to bring out the best and most beautiful part of ourselves, we need to sacrifice something. So this is what Lao Tzu said, to study art every day, but if you want to follow the Tao, you have daily to subtract. And also Yang Zhu was saying, don't let things wear out your body. So the last thought is that it's fantastic to work on Yangsheng, but it doesn't make sense if it doesn't bring mastery in your real life. So this means that feeding the best part of us, so freeing the plant from the weeds, from the excess of branches and leaves to make it more beautiful, that like the chrysanthemum. If you want to obtain a chrysanthemum like this, which is wonderful, so beautiful, you have to sacrifice almost all the buds. Otherwise, it has the shape of a daisy. So this nourishing the best part of us by cutting away, severing what we don't need, makes no sense if it doesn't bring beauty to the world as well. So we must be really aware of not confusing the goals and the means. So it is not enough to work on ourselves if we don't bring harmony in the world. So the inner work cannot be an end in itself. The inner work is a mean, but then it must bring authenticity to our relationships. So with ourselves, with the others, and with the chi of heaven. So this is the message for autumn. Okay, this is my last slide, and thank you very much for your patient attendance, and maybe we can have some time for questions now.
Thank you so much, Giulia. I'm speechless. That was an absolutely beautiful presentation. As you know, I studied a lot of Yangsheng myself, but I don't think I've ever seen something so beautifully woven together like that as a presentation. And
You're always very kind with me,
well,
Alex.
it's
Thank
from the
you.
heart. I mean, genuinely, I don't just say it. I'm really blown away. And I think that there's a way that you put things together, which is um, you just put it into what perfect words at the end there, that you don't lose sight of the beauty of the medicine and the integrity and the yes, someone Chang just said the presentation is therapeutic itself. I felt like I was I felt like I was going through some kind of a deep healing process while I was listening to it. Um, it's Chinese medicine, it interfaces with every aspect of our being, even the aspects that we're not often conscious of. And we have a tendency sometimes do either speak in a very flowery way or speak in a very reductionist way, but not um, bring them together so that we can have something that's meaningful and useful but beautiful at the same time. And it's so it's wonderful. Um, if there are any questions, please feel free to put your hand up and or write them in the chat, and then I'll come to you. While we're waiting for those questions to come through, I've got one for myself, Julia. I'm trying to find a way to put it into words because what was so interesting you were talking about in the autumn. Um, there's a tendency to think of it as something that's um, uh, that you're going. Sometimes they talk about autumn as moving into decline and death, right? For example, right? And there's this idea, and obviously certain things in nature are dying around us, don't need to be regenerated. But then the other way of thinking is that we are consolidating something, um, bringing our, allowing our awareness to consolidate at the root in the kidneys. And if we can do that consciously, you were talking about being able to almost fill with awareness so that we can, I can't even describe it, but the idea of connecting with this, the shrimful and the skin layer and this aspect of our being. And I feel clearly that this also comes from an experience as well, right? And so in Qigong, at the end of the um, practice, you bring the energy down, condense it into the dantian, into the kidneys, so that it can go inside and it can start to um, nourish the root, but also then over time you can build and expand, radiate outwards so that you can maybe then be aware of all the levels of your body all the way up to the outer layer. Um, so I guess my question is that um, is there some kind of connection here with consciousness and awareness and non-consciousness and awareness? Because winter and mid and night is associated in the everyday mind with going unconscious. And is there some aspect of cultivation where actually it's bringing the conscious state to the unconscious and then connecting to something that pervades through all the layers? I don't know if I'm articulating myself well, Julia.
No, if if I have understood your question,
Yeah.
it's a little bit like what we were saying about yin being passive. I don't think that we are unconscious during our sleep. We are just in a different state of consciousness. And this is the same thing that we should look for in this kind of inner work. What I mean is that we have seen that lungs and kidneys are especially related to the fluids in the body as well as the blood, that is related to the liver and to the springtime and the heart. So the blood is what has our consciousness. This is connected to the shishen, to the conscious spirit, which is the one that we use in this lifespan. But we have an eternal life flowing inside us. And that eternal life goes with the Yangsheng, so the primordial Shen. And the primordial Shen is in the brain, not in the heart, and is connected to the fluids. So the thing is not awareness or known awareness, is being connected with the sensory world around us or being connected with the non-sensory world or with the extrasensory
Mm.
world inside us.
So interesting. Yes. A lot of food for thought. It's a absolutely beautiful presentation, Julia. And lots of thanks in the chat. Any questions for Julia? I think
Thank
um,
you so much. You're really very encouraging. Thank you.
would anyone like to ask a question or unmute at all to Julia? I feel like we all just want more, Julia. It's really beautiful because it's so grounded in the language as well of the medicine and
I can see a question. Do you think this autumn is earlier? I don't understand. Sorry.
is it
Can you please explain me better what you mean?
are you asking
Hi,
if
hi, Julia. Sorry,
oh,
Hi.
sorry for the
Hello.
ambiguous question. Um, I know today is Li Chiu. However, about 5, 7 days ago, I feel it's landed. The su, the descending metal feeling has descended, and the some leaves turn yellow. So as
Mhm.
if the nature has its own cycle. Um,
I think
even
it's highly probable that the cycles are quite disrupted at the moment. There's not a big harmony in the world. And when you see how many winds of wars are around, you might believe that the metal element it's a little bit too predominant at the moment. Yes.
hmm, well, yes, great observation. And then there is always a natural variation each year as well, isn't there? So with but yeah, it's but Cheng, I definitely noticed something in the last week. And I also noticed that in the quality of light, is that in some of the passages they talk about you get it's almost like a sharpness of light. It's beautiful light. The light in autumn is a clarity. It's very clear and I can't remember the Chinese words, but they use that word but a very clear, sharp kind of sensation. And I don't know if people see that, but it's in I love this period, August, September in the UK. You go walking in nature and the light is just extraordinary.
Mm, mm, mm,
Mm.
mm.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's all the questions that we can see, Julia. So just finally to say thank you very much. And
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm really glad that there's still people awake and still following, and I feel encouraged. Thank you so much by your comments. And maybe there was another question. I don't know if we
yeah,
have
one
the
question
time to answer to that.
absolutely. Yeah, one question from Pierre. She says, the foods to eat are naturally in season. I presume this is no coincidence.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right.
I had another,
Okay, so
yes,
thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Absolutely wonderful. And as I say, we will send information about the slides through e-news, and we'll also send around information about Julia's book as well when we find a good place to get it through to everyone who signed up for the lecture. But thank you everyone for coming, and I hope to see you at a future webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much. Bye.
My pleasure. Ciao.